The Prime Minister on the global stage this week, talking trade and what the return of Donald Trump means for the world. While here at home, the government is preparing to push through a raft of legislation through Parliament in the last sitting fortnight of the year. As speculation mounts, it could be the last before an election. I'm Patricia Carvallis, in for David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. The Prime Minister has just left the APEC conference in Peru, where he made the case for free and fair trade and talked up the positive benefits it has for the global economy and Australian jobs. It's a stark contrast to Donald Trump's promise to revitalise the US economy by slapping tariffs of up to 60% on all imports. Government insiders are confident Australia can again negotiate a carve-out from US trade sanctions. But the man who will be central to those negotiations, Ambassador Kevin Rudd, is under pressure over previous comments he's made about President-elect Trump. But the Prime Minister is pushing back against calls for Rudd to pack his bags ahead of Trump's return to the White House.
Anthony Albanese is heading to back-to-back summits in Peru and Brazil.
We're discussing how trade is important for Australian jobs and for the Australian economy.
As world leaders hold their collective breath over the return of President Trump and what it means for global trade.
Did President Prabowo and you discuss the incoming Trump administration and what that might mean for the world?
We had a good discussion. He'd had a phone conversation with President Trump.
I would like to congratulate you on your election as President of the United States of America.
Your English is so good.
With the President-elect also promising sweeping new tariffs, the Prime Minister is also standing up for free trade.
Australia will always support free and fair trade. We're a trading nation.
Donald Trump back in Washington for talks in the Capitol building and in the White House with Joe Biden.
Welcome. Thank you. Politics is tough, and it's in many cases not a very nice world.
While he's not yet in office and not in Peru, his shadow will loom over the summit.
The PM's problem is that his man in Washington, Kevin Rudd, is being singled out by one of the incoming president's aides for his past criticism of Mr. Trump.
He's uploaded a picture of an hourglass next to Kevin Rudd's statement of congratulations, suggesting the Australian ambassador's previous criticisms of the president-elect have not been forgotten.
The previous bipartisan support for the ambassador appears to be cracking.
This was a captain's call, as we know, from Prime Minister Albanese, and I want us to have a functioning, stable relationship with our most important partner.
Ambassador Rudd's doing a good job, and that's been recognised across the political spectrum in Australia by people from Tony Abbott to Malcolm Turnbull to Peter Dutton and obviously to the Australian government.
But ultimately, the PM and Ambassador Rudd have to put Australia's interests first.
We've had a very constructive beginning to our relationship. Thanks a lot.
Coming up, David Speers speaks with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in Lima, Peru. But first, let's see what's making news. The Nine Papers' chief political correspondent David Crowe reports Australian business leaders have warned of severe costs to households if the world retreats from free trade when President-elect Donald Trump takes office in January. Trump's promise to impose massive tariffs on China and other countries could cost Australia as much as $36 billion in lost economic growth. And in the Sunday age, Australians will be asked to wait beyond next year's federal election to learn the government's 2035 target for tackling climate change, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese holding off announcing the target to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Under the Paris Agreement, Australia's 2035 target for emissions reduction is due next year. And finally, a story in the Sunday Mail in Adelaide. Labor has recorded a huge swing to win yesterday's by-election in the state seat of Black. The by-election was triggered by the resignation of Liberal leader David Speers, who's facing drugs charges he is defending. At the conclusion of counting on Saturday night, Labor candidate Alex Dighton had polled more than 60% of the two-candidate preferred vote to comfortably defeat Liberal Amanda Wilson. Well, back to South America now. The Prime Minister has left Peru, bound for the G20 meeting in Brazil. David Speers is travelling with the Prime Minister, and I spoke with him a short time ago. David, this APEC summit has been the first gathering of leaders since Donald Trump's election win. How much of a shadow is he casting over discussions there?
Well, PK, Donald Trump is not here, but he is certainly very present in the conversations that have been taking place. And that's no surprise, given the sweeping tariffs that he's threatening to impose on the world and the withdrawal once again of the US from the Paris Climate Agreement. Anthony Albanese, for his part, well, a few things have stood out. He's come here standing by policy principles on free trade, also urging leaders to continue momentum towards net zero when it comes to climate change, and warning against any retreat to isolationism. Now, he's not suggesting that is targeted at Donald Trump. He's not trying to pick any fights with the president-elect. He wants a warm working relationship, but nor is he going to echo Trump's policy positions. Not when he thinks they're certainly not in Australia's interests. He's also sensitive to the suggestion that's been aired in Chinese state-run media that this represents some sort of shift from Australia to a more independent foreign policy approach. One other thing that's been noticeable, I think, Anthony Albanese has gone out of his way to show respect for Joe Biden here, the outgoing US president, certainly copping a lot of grief back home for the election outcome there. He's on something of a farewell tour. But at yesterday's sessions and the gala dinner last night, Anthony Albanese's made a beeline to be by Joe Biden's side. I spoke to the Prime Minister here at the APEC summit about how he's navigating this new global landscape. Prime Minister, thanks for your time here in Peru.
Good to be here.
You came to this APEC summit with a few important messages. Stick with free trade, continue taking action on climate change, and don't retreat into isolation. How much of this message is aimed at the man who's not here, Donald Trump?
No, it's squarely aimed at one thing, David, and that's Australia's national interest. We're a trading nation, and I support free and fair trade. 1 in 4 Australian jobs depends on trade. We have 75% of our trade occurs with APEC nations, and it's important to do that. In addition to that, of course, climate change is something that we have to deal with. It's in Australia's national interest, and I see climate change as not just a challenge, which it is, but it's also an opportunity, and a particular opportunity for Australia.
And I want to come to that, but you can see how it looks like Donald Trump's just won. He's saying he's going to abandon action on climate change. He's going to put up all these tariff barriers. And you've come here to say, hang on, we need to stick with these things.
So has all of the 21 economies which are represented here, because APEC was an organisation where Bob Hawke and Paul Keating played a critical role 35 years ago.
About trade.
The first APEC summit.
So this is not some strategic autonomy, as a new shift to strategic autonomy, as China's state-run media have said.
This is consistent with Australia's position as it's been under the former Labor government of Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, and Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, under most of the coalition as well, it must be said.
Nonetheless, are you worried?
We're a trading nation. We benefit from it, and it is about Australian jobs.
Are you worried then about the prospect of a trade war, given what Donald Trump is promising?
We'll continue to advocate for free and fair trade. Donald Trump will take office on January 20. I'm not going to preempt what his administration might do. He clearly has an agenda. We'll wait and see how that plays out.
Is there a role Australia could play as an ally of the US, a great trading partner of China, to lower the temperature on trade?
Well, the role that Australia can play is to be a strong and consistent advocate for markets, for free and fair trade, for jobs to be created. Trade has not just benefited the industrialised nations like Australia to be able to export our resources, export manufactured goods, export services such as education. It's also lifted up in this region, literally, tens of millions of people out of poverty.
Did you ask Donald Trump in your phone call to give Australia an exemption from any new tariffs?
No, I pointed out, though, to President Trump that the United States has a trade surplus with Australia. It's had that trade surplus since Truman was president. So both the United States and Australia benefit from the trade between our two countries.
Would it be a perfect relationship, as he called it, if he slapped tariffs on Australia?
Well, he said we're going to have a perfect friendship. And I'm very confident that the relationship with the United States will stay strong.
And no tariffs?
It was under, well, I'm very confident we will put forward Australia's national interest.
You're confident we'll get an exemption?
Well, I don't want to preempt those decisions, but we'll advocate for Australia's national interest. That's my job to do so, because 1 in 4 of jobs in Australia is trade dependent. And that's why we benefit from it. And many of those jobs, of course, are high-value jobs as well.
OK, on climate change, as you've been arguing here, the world should continue towards net zero. Your British counterpart, Keir Starmer, is clearly undeterred by Donald Trump pulling out of, or planning to pull out of, the Paris Agreement. He's announced the 2035 target for the UK, an ambitious one, 81% lower emissions. Can you reach that level of ambition?
Well, I'll leave each nation state to do their NDC and to put forward their targets. We've got a target that we introduced when we came into office.
That was the 2030 target. Yeah, but you've got to do the 2035 target next.
No, Keir Starmer has come into office and has come up with a new target for a new government.
Which, well, under the Paris Agreement, you have to have a 2035 target next year, right?
Yeah, sometime next year.
Before the election?
Well, our focus is on achieving the 2030 target, because 2030 comes before 2035.
But don't we deserve to know, before we go to the polls, what you're planning to do?
You do know exactly what we're doing. 43% by 2030.
But for 2035?
A target of net zero by 2050. 82% renewables by 2030. You have a whole mechanism. You not only know what we're going to do, you know how we're going to get there, through the safeguard mechanism in particular, as well as through the capacity investment scheme that's been particularly successful. So we've got a model for what we will do, which is renewables backed by gas, and you've got how we're going to get there, which is using market-based mechanisms.
But investors need the target, don't they? I mean, they're looking around the world, they'll be looking at the UK, they'll be looking at Australia.
And they have a target, David, from us. What they don't have is an alternative government with any policy besides something in the distance to the 2040s that will produce 4% of Australia's energy needs under their nuclear plan. They don't have costings for it. They don't have any plan for what will happen in between 2025 and the 2040s.
Let's stick with your plans. You've been making the point here that if the US under Donald Trump gets rid of the Inflation Reduction Act and the big incentives for green investment in the US, Australia might be able to pick up some opportunities. Is that realistic? What sort of investments might we get?
Well, there's first mover advantage, of course. And so when there is a change, sometimes an opportunity comes as well. And one of the things we've seen is considerable capital flow to the United States as a direct result of the policies that have been in place. Now, if those policies change, then obviously the economics change of investment and incentives and attractiveness.
But we're not going to pick up electric vehicle manufacturing, for example. What would we pick up?
Well, I'm not preempting all of that. I'm not getting ahead of where the Trump administration might go, but they've said there'll be changes. And I've just made the point that where there's changes, there's also the potential for opportunity.
Well, you're not the only one looking at opportunities. Singapore, Malaysia, they're working on a special economic zone to entice manufacturing there as well. Would you consider topping up the incentives given what's happening, given this changing landscape?
Well, we're going to have announcements in the lead up to the election next year and beyond.
So you might have further incentives?
What we'll do, well, we already have considerable incentives there through the mechanisms that we have in place, but also through investment schemes such as for industry policy, including the National Reconstruction Fund. I can indicate that the first approvals from the National Reconstruction Fund have been agreed to. Those announcements will start to roll out from the coming week. What that's about is identifying the opportunity that's there in everything from defence to agriculture to new technology, IT, to all of these areas, the benefits that we can have to make more things in Australia.
There'll be more to come before the election.
Well, we have legislation before the Parliament as well for a future made in Australia.
Okay.
And my vision is for cheaper, cleaner energy, powering, advanced manufacturing, and there's nowhere. One of the discussions that I'm always uplifted by when I come to conferences like this. I had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Singapore earlier today, Lawrence Wong. One of the things that Singapore doesn't have is space. Now, the opportunity that's there for us to use the best solar resources in the world, to have solar panels producing power, not just for Australia domestically, but potentially exporting that power as well, is enormous.
Now, just on Donald Trump, his cabinet picks that we've seen over the past week have been raising, well, a lot of criticism, including from some Republicans. One in particular that matters to Australia is his pick for Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, a veteran, a Fox News host. Had you even heard of Pete Hegseth before he announced him?
Well, I'd heard of him, but those decisions are, of course, a matter for Donald Trump. They're not something that Australia interferes with. We respect whatever decisions are made. And my job and the job of all of our ministers is to work with their respective colleagues, and I'm very confident that we'll be able to do that.
But I guess this goes to whether Australia has many connections with this new crew of loyalists around Donald Trump that he's selecting. I know there was an anticipation Mike Pompeo would be there and there were efforts made to talk to him, but has anyone spoken to this selection for Defence Secretary?
Well, we've made efforts across the board. When I was in the United States for my state visit last year, take for example, I was the first meeting that Speaker Johnson had after his election as Speaker of the Congress, the third most powerful position in the United States system. But
a lot's changed since then.
I think Speaker Johnson, you'll find, will have considerable influence. And I met with over 100 Democrats and Republicans from the Congress, from the Senate, and we have been working very hard to make sure that we have links across the political spectrum, as you'd expect.
Are you willing to put more money in to the US system, into their industrial base, to get AUKUS locked in under Donald Trump?
We have an agreement that has received overwhelming support in the Congress and the Senate.
But we don't know whether Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth are on board.
Well, we have a substantial agreement across the board, and there is nothing but positive statements has come out of the US system for a long period of time. Remember this, David, that there was all this speculation that AUKUS wouldn't be agreed to. We've got Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 agreed to, legislated in the United States, legislated in Australia.
All right, so finally that brings me to Kevin Rudd as ambassador and the attention that's been on his previous descriptions of Donald Trump as a village idiot, amongst other things. Look, others who've criticised Trump in the past, including J.D. Vance, had to make very public mea culpas. J.D. Vance said it's very important to admit you're wrong. Do you think Kevin Rudd might have to make some sort of public mea culpa, or would that be simply too demeaning for an Australian ambassador?
Well, look, we're focused on the future, and I'm sure President Trump will be as well. And that is the important thing. Kevin Rudd has been doing a terrific job.
So you don't want him to apologise?
Well, Kevin Rudd's been doing a terrific job as ambassador. And all of the comments that have been raised prior to his appointment, and Ambassador Rudd has been working with people across the political spectrum. He attended both the Republican and the Democrat national conventions and engaged with people across the board. I know that he was in regular contact with the head of the Republican campaign committee as well as the Democrats. And that's
so he'll stay?
That's what we'd expect.
He'll stay no matter what?
Yeah, he's Australia's appointment, and it says something about the importance of the United States that we have appointed a former Prime Minister, that's a sign of how seriously we take this relationship, which is a relationship between our peoples based upon our common values.
Prime Minister, we'll see you at the G20 in Brazil. Thanks for joining us.
You will. Thanks, David.
So a couple of quick takeouts from that conversation with the Prime Minister. He is making the case for Australia to be given exemptions from any new Trump tariffs. On climate change, we may not hear what Australia's 2035 climate target will be before Australians go to the polls in 2035. But the Prime Minister is making the case, certainly here on the world stage, that Australia can be a renewable energy powerhouse, that it can export solar power to the world as is planned under the Sun Cable Agreement with Singapore. And on Kevin Rudd, well, the US ambassador is staying put. It's now on to the next summit where there will be more of a focus on climate change and a potential meeting between Anthony Albanese and China's President Xi Jinping. That's at the G20 in Brazil.
Thanks, David. And joining me on the panel, Annabel Crabb, Peter Hartcher and Katina Curtis. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
All right, let's get into it. Annabel, obviously APEC is now over. The G20 will begin. Donald Trump not at any of these talks because he doesn't take the presidency till January, but he has overshadowed the talks.
Oh, he's there. Listen, I just think it's hard to overstate just how theatrically, resplendently dramatic the last couple of weeks have been, right? But the fact that this kind of cavalcade of institutions of the global rules-based order would follow the election of Donald Trump, like institutions in which Donald Trump has zero interest, that they should follow his election so faithfully and so quickly, and that, of course, our Prime Minister, a great proponent of the rules-based order, a great defender of free trade and so on, should be sort of jinking around to one and then the other and then the other, as they all work out how they're going to Trump-proof themselves. Because it feels like we're just sort of moving from a rules-based order world to one where you've got these powerful guys who have, you know, possible borderline personality disorders in some cases, right? Not being specific here, but these decisions about, you know, what's going to happen in Ukraine, what's going to happen in the Middle East, what's going to happen to trade, what's going to happen with climate, don't feel like they're going to be made by these institutions anymore, right?
No, so they've gone along, haven't they, Peter, with the dance of these forums. We've seen the Prime Minister with Justin Trudeau, with Joe Biden. None of these relationships seem to be where the tricky bit's going to come in, and that's trade and doing a deal with Trump.
Well, Annabel just described it as Trump-proofing. I don't think anyone can Trump-proof.
But they're trying.
I think this is Trump surviving. This is how do we survive this change. Remember that APEC was formed specifically to promote free trade. The members are now trying to shore up what can we do around this new de-risking or de-linking or whatever you want to call it, as two new trade blocks form around the US and China. And the rest of us have to negotiate between those two blocks. And now we're going to see the G20, which, remember, was brought together to deal with the global financial crisis. They're going to try and figure out what they can do the next time there's a global financial crisis and whether it's even possible to come up with an internationally coordinated response without the biggest economy.
And as David just told us, climate will be on the agenda there. And we've just had the COP conference as well. Joe Biden wasn't there, Anthony Albanese wasn't there, but of course very senior representatives were there. Donald Trump wants to pull out of Paris. That all changes too, right? And we've heard the Prime Minister in the interview this morning with David talk about wanting to be at, what was it? First mover advantage. So the first mover might be retreating now. That's the US. Australia wants to exploit that opportunity.
Yeah.
Is that going to work?
I mean, I think we'll really see the real big fear over the last couple of years in Australia has been about the flight of capital to the US because of the Inflation Reduction Act. I think they are probably fair to be hopeful that some of that would come back to Australia. And in terms of the COP going on this week that Bowen's just arrived over in Azerbaijan for, but I was actually at the COP in 2017, so after Donald Trump's first year, and he pulled out of Paris the first time, and there was still actually a really enormous US presence. They had a big kind of tent just outside the main room saying it was like the "we are still in" coalition. It was, the California governor and some of the other major states.
Which is a huge economy.
Yeah. So I think there'll still be probably a lot of subnational action. That was what happened last time. You can probably still expect to see that this time.
That's really interesting. Now, obviously, the election of Donald Trump, Annabel, has led to a lot of reading in terms of what it means for our politics and the implications. I just want to play you this because obviously what Trump means for Australian politics is interesting. There have been some notable backbenchers in the coalition calling for perhaps Australia not to be committed to net zero by 2050. But this week, a really interesting intervention from the Nationals leader, David Littleproud. Here he is.
The United States is 330 million people. They're one of the biggest economies in the world, and they can throw their weight around. But we can't, and we've made an international commitment, and we're on a trajectory, but the trajectory that Labor's putting on us is a linear one that's hurting our economy. We can achieve it in a uniquely Australian way, and we have to be sensible about this in protecting not only our industries, but also living up to that international commitment.
Okay, so Annabel, that's the key bit, living up to that international agreement. What's going on here?
Well, I think that there is a real tendency still, and I don't know why, given that we've all been observing President Trump for a long time, to kind of have this degree of literalism in interpreting the detail of what he's saying. This guy is a drama guy, He's a drama guy. He's kind of the leader of the TLDR, too long didn't read, generation, right? I mean, the odds that he's kind of thinking in detail about exactly how the Inflation Reduction Act is going to, be reconstituted to not disadvantage Texas or whatever is very low, I'd say, because he's all, he likes deals and he likes winning. So to kind of try and pass the detail of these climate, arrangements, I think is in some ways a waste of time. I think also people reading a lot into what happened to the United States in terms of culture war issues. Oh, well, that means this, so therefore that. Too literal. Forget about it, right? So what Littleproud is saying there is actually, well, let's not be literal about what this means. It's a sensible analysis, right? It says, well, what are we doing? How is it possible for us to get good deals, which is actually the best way to think in a Trump world, right? How do we get good deals? It is possible to get them even though they seem to perforate the top line message of Donald Trump, and that's fine. He's just appointed Elon Musk, who runs a green car company
that man
that makes stuff
getting
in
rid of
China,
emissions, you'd think.
That makes stuff in China, and that at the same time as I'm going to implement 60% tariffs, and also I think climate change is a hoax. Sorry, what? It doesn't. I've appointed this guy to be health secretary who, wants to ban junk food, which is all that I eat, by the way. I mean, nothing makes sense. Stop expecting it to.
Okay, nothing makes sense, but it does peer back on the sort of broader climate.
Sorry,
I enjoyed that thoroughly.
I leapt the tracks.
That's why you're here.
My apologies.
Annabel, love your work. But on the climate change, architecture, net zero by 2050, we've got both sides of politics still in for that ambition. But we're not going to hear the target for 2035, are we, before an election, are we, Peter Hartcher?
No, because...
Why would you?
Because why would Albanese give Peter Dutton another target to attack before an election and during a campaign? Or the Greens.
As well.
That's right.
Either way, he'll come win, right?
That's right. So postpone it, of course. On the Trump question and climate change, I think the biggest story happening in the world is with the biggest emitter, which is China, where its economic slowdown is probably the biggest single change in the outlook for emissions worldwide. That means that China's emissions will now peak probably 5 to 6 years earlier. That's a big improvement. And with Trump, what the president says matters, but what private investors do and the states do on climate policy in the US is more important.
Are you saying it doesn't necessarily make a really big difference to the sort of investment decisions?
I am. So, for example, he loves that theme of drill, baby, drill. But the people who do the drilling aren't the federal government, it's private companies. And the big oil majors in the US have already said they love it, of course. They'll love the freedom, the ability to do what they want. But they've said they're not planning to increase production very much because there's already a glut of oil in the world market. And the International Energy Agency is predicting, so global consumption is about 13 million barrels. The IEA is saying by the end of this decade there'll be a surplus daily 8 million barrels. So the industry isn't planning to destroy the price of their own product by massively ramping up.
No.
So I think there will be less impact. And final point, 2016, Donald Trump, he said he was going to pull out of Paris and do all this stuff. The trajectory of US emissions didn't change.
Oh, that's really interesting. Look, I just want to talk about the story that's been quite dominant this week, and that's Kevin Rudd. He's former Prime Minister, former Foreign Minister, former a lot of things, actually, right? And now our ambassador. Some more comments emerged, Annabel, where he called Donald Trump a village idiot. And then there was this hourglass
emoji diplomacy.
It was an emoji diplomacy suggesting maybe time's running out for him. I just want to kind of let you know the sorts of people that have been defending Kevin Rudd, because it's quite interesting. Here's the former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. He's got a podcast, did you know? Here he is.
Whatever you think of Kevin Rudd, you couldn't say that the guy is not hyperactive. I would be surprised if there is any pressure from the Americans to change our ambassador. I have no reason to think that Kevin is not doing a good job at present.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. Tony Abbott. Hyperactive or whatever, what did he call him?
I may be out of step with conventional thinking here, but I just think Kevin Rudd is kind of exactly the right person to be there right now. Why? Because he never sleeps. He is he is absolutely indestructible. He wants to win, and he is sort of shameless. And like in this environment, like that, these are good attributes, right? And he does know what he's talking about re China, right? Like, so he's got a use to Trump. I think, you know, history tells us that Donald Trump, what he loves more than anything is to have a person who has traduced him forced to come and make amends and beg for indulgence.
Okay, but that's an interesting point.
The question isn't, I think, whether Donald Trump will, you know, hack that. I mean, he's just hired 1 million people who have been terrible, said terrible things about him. The question is Kevin Rudd prepared to kiss butt?
To bend the knee, as they like to say. Right? Well, let's just hear Kevin Rudd. Here's Kevin Rudd in 2018.
We should not be looking at Trump as an international norm setter on the terms of international trade negotiations. Trump is not a norm setter, he is a norm destroyer.
Okay, well, there you go, Katina. That's Kevin Rudd. In his own words, a norm destroyer. Doesn't matter that he said it.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, as Annabel was saying, it really doesn't matter. Probably the main thing that people have that's come up when I've asked people about this week is they say, well, the thing is that's ultimately going to be is, does Kevin think Kevin is bigger than the relationship between Australia and the US? You know, it's going to, yes, he is a very hard worker, absolutely. You know, he's meeting lots of people, as Peter wrote yesterday, you know, run through a list of people who are look like they will be in the new administration who he's been getting ties with. But, you know, there is probably going to have to be some kind of a, you know, well, here's what I think now, and everything will be fine. And don't we have a perfect friendship, Donald?
Yeah. It's all going to be perfect soon. You did write that column. He's been pretty busy. Has he been trying to break bread with people that we don't even know about?
Yes, is the answer. Prominent among them, well, Marco Rubio, the nominated Secretary of State, they've already got together. And others we didn't know about. So the new incoming proposed head of the CIA, for example. Importantly, we know that Rudd and his wife Therese have had dinner several times with the incoming trade negotiator for the US, Robert Lighthizer, and that's going to obviously be a central part of the disruption that the US is about to impose on the world. So those relationships, you know, that's pretty important. Also, the new National Security Advisor. He and Trump have known each other. He and Rudd have known each other for five or so years. So he does have connections already. Is he prepared to do a mea culpa and say you're a great guy, Donald Trump? Look,
he only just took down the tweets, didn't he?
Rudd is many former things, as you've said. He's also a politician. Is a politician able to compliment somebody? Absolutely. Lay on the flattery with a trial, absolutely. And
flattery is one thing, but an apology or a mea culpa that's too over the top, would that be bad for Australia? Would we look...
Depends on whether it's public or private, I suppose. But look, of course Trump loves a sycophant, but the one thing he loves more than a sycophant is a convert. Somebody like J.D. Vance, who said he was an idiot, who said he was America's Hitler. But to convert somebody from critic to fan is the ultimate satisfaction for an insecure ego like Donald Trump.
OK, so he has to look like he's become a fan. I get that.
So is Kevin Rudd prepared to do that for us?
Well, he does love us, Annabel. Let me... Peter Dutton...
do anything for you, Annabel.
Peter Dutton's had a few things to say this week about it. Let's hear him here.
The difficulty that the Prime Minister's in at the moment is that if he sacks Kevin Rudd, then what does he do with Penny Wong? And if he sacks Penny Wong, what does he do, given he's made his own disparaging remarks about President-elect Trump as well? And look, these are issues for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's got a lot of messes to deal with at the moment, all of his own making.
OK, what's he doing?
Look, he's having a lovely time is what's happening right there. He's enjoying it because, you know, he knows, and I think probably everybody knows, I may be wrong about this, you may disagree, but, I mean, if Anthony Albanese stood Kevin Rudd down now, which he won't because he's, you know, loyal and that's why...
And it also looks a bit, well, crazy desperate, doesn't it?
It would look sort of, crazy desperate is a good expression, and let's employ it here. I think it would look like a startled overreaction. It would look like to a guy whose main negotiating tactic is sort of throwing something weird at you and seeing if it freaks you out, which is sort of what Trump does, right? He's like, did you flinch? I think it would look like a big flinch. So I just... Also, how do people go when they sack Kevin Rudd from things? Like, does he ever go away and
that is a really good point. I just want to talk about Donald Trump's appointments this week that have been wildly controversial already. Lots of key positions. But just to set it up, there are two key positions I want to talk about. Matt Gaetz, who was once a Justice Department target, now will be in charge of the Justice Department, and also RFK, who has many different ideas. Here's RFK and then Gaetz.
I think fluoride is a poison.
We're ashamed of nothing. Seize the day. We're proud of the work that we did on January 6th.
OK, so quite controversial figures, no disagreement there. What do you make of the decisions he's made, and are you surprised?
Well, no, absolutely not, because there are two defining qualifications, really, for almost all of the appointments so far. One, a total and absolute loyalty to Donald Trump, and second, a determination to disrupt. Trump has promised to dismantle the deep state. Now, you know, in layman's language, that means the intelligence services, the Justice Department, and the military. He's
literally torching the joint, right?
Yeah, and he said, we will dismantle the administrative state. Well, that just means the federal government. And these appointments are giving force, intending to give force to those promises. Remember, he hasn't been elected president to make people's lives better. Most Americans don't expect that he will make their lives better. Most Americans voted for him because they think he will destroy a system which they've come to loathe and distrust. He is the god of destruction for America, and these are his, shall we say, angels of destruction.
So, Katina, in some ways, Katina, I just want to get you on this. He is delivering on what he said he would do.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know,
He wasn't specific, but he certainly is really breaking the system.
We were draining the swamp the first time round, and this time we just seem to be blasting it out of obliteration. I think I did find it funny that you know, having held on to got the majority in the Senate and the House just barely, and now he's busy appointing all these people from the House as well. So there was, I think it was the Speaker was sort of said, look, maybe just hold off, just don't take any more. We've only got five or so in the majority.
About a year ago, there was this piece of analysis in the Atlantic by a guy called James Parker, who's not a political writer. It was about wrestling. And he wrote that Trump was like a classic WWF villain, right? Doing all these sort of pulling these moves, drawing boos from the crowd, all of which are kind of complicit in the show, right? Yeah. And he wrote fantastic analysis. Much of Trump's most appalling public behaviour is in the repertoire of a classic villain. To loudly deplore it, to boo and hiss, only reassures his fans, right? And this recruitment drive is like a, WWF thing. And he was introduced by Hulk Hogan at the RNC, right? So, you've got the new Defence Minister, Secretary for Defence, Pete Hegseth, who's sort of like,
Fox
Navy SEAL section. And you've got, Kennedy, who's like with the dead bear cub. There's so much drama and kind of flash and dazzle. And again, I think to take it literally is an error. Yeah. To see what it means theatrically in terms of what he's projecting to the American people is kind of the main issue here.
It's definitely entertaining. If people are sick of politics because it's not working for them.
Well, it is a form of entertainment, there's no doubt. Look, I'm going to move on to another story which was quite talking point this week in Australia. Australia backed a United Nations resolution to recognise the permanent sovereignty of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. That's a major departure from previous positions and a break again with the United States, where we have been historically quite aligned. Simon Birmingham, the Shadow Foreign Affairs spokesman, had this to say.
Again and again and again, the Labor government has shown that they are dramatically changing those positions, that they've significantly changed it in relation to the pathway to a two-state solution. They've changed it in relation to a number of UN votes, and in this instance have changed it at a time where the United States continues to vote no.
It is a significant departure, and it really shows that the two major parties are really not on the same page on this.
Yeah, this is a widening divide in Australian politics. It's largely performative, of course, because it doesn't change the facts on the ground, but almost all of Australian policy on Israel, on Palestine is performative, zero impact on the ground. It's Labor shoring up its left flank. The US election showed in Michigan, for example, that this was quite a powerful vote deterrent, and the Greens and Independents and the no votes at all candidates picked up significantly. So this is Albanese's attempt and Penny Wong's attempt to shore up their left flank.
So you think it's about domestic politics?
It's about domestic politics. It's about protecting their left against defection of voters to the Greens.
Katina, do you see it in that context too?
I think it is partially about domestic politics. The motion was, as you said, around sovereignty of the Palestinians, but it was actually around sovereignty over natural resources. But it is it's a change. Like we've changed position from how there seems to be all these things at the UN that just come up every year, the same thing every year. There was a thing where we criticised China a month or so ago, and it was like, well, this same thing comes up every year. So we've definitely yes, we have changed from the position we've had before. I think yes, it is around the domestic politics, and it is also I guess inching Australia towards inching Labor towards what its stated party platform is as well.
Yeah, that's right. Look, the other big thing that's happened that I think we need to note, and there's legislation that has been clearly agreed to by the two major parties, is electoral reform. And it's huge. It's a huge change to the way we do politics, more public funding essentially for elections. The big money coming out of election campaigns, according to Labor. Let's just hear the Minister responsible, Don Farrell, explain it.
What these changes will do is take big money out of Australian politics. It'll strengthen our democracy. The Westminster system has served Australia federally very well for the last 125 years. I want it to continue to work in the interests of Australians.
So that's the Minister responsible, Don Farrell. The Westminster system has benefited Australia. A lot of the independents have read that to mean the two-party system.
Sure, and that was sort of at the core of our planning, but we're changing. A third of Australians do not vote for either major party. What's happening here is kind of extraordinary, really, is you've got the two major parties, both of them are concerned about leakage to independents and to minor parties. fuelled by well-funded campaigners. So the coalition, really, it's the Teals, the Climate 200 money coming in that's helping strip out some of their most valuable seats. Labor's worried about your Clive Palmers and so on. So they've got together and done themselves it's a pretty outrageous little deal. It says, hey, I'll rub out the people who are annoying you if you rub out the people who are annoying me. They've sat down and they've put together a giant piece of legislation, which was announced on Thursday. If we don't, go back to Parliament next year, this is our opportunity to shove it through.
Yeah, and it comes in after the next election, but still.
But this is the opportunity to move now. Yep. There's consensus between the two major parties, smash, smash, smash. Now, the outrageous thing is that the money that's foregone from the system because you're not allowed to spend more than, $80,000 or whatever in any seat, is going to be paid for by whom? Us. It's going to be an increased public funding. So we're actually asking the public
in a cost of living
crisis to fund a narrowing of their choices. I want to vote for an... Oh, no, you don't. You want to choose between us. Come on.
Let's hear
now
Kate,
cough up.
one of the independents, Kate Chaney, spoke to me on Friday. Here she is.
The approach has been, we're going to work it out with the Liberal Party and we'll let you know afterwards. And so the consultation has felt a bit like going through the motions. And I think that given that a third of Australians have cast their primary vote not for a major party, there needs to be greater scrutiny and greater public access to an exposure draft.
Look, I didn't talk to Kate Chaney, by the way, but I will say that if this piece of legislation that just popped up, there's 4 pages of definition of what constitutes a political gift. And 2 of those pages are exemptions. So plenty of ways that the unions can still... Anyway.
No, Katina, that's right. But I suppose let's go to one of the principles, though, which is getting big money out of politics. That's not such a bad thing, is it?
Well, I don't think so. But everyone has kind of been alarmed. Well, probably everyone except Clive Palmer has been alarmed about the huge amounts of money that have been thrown in.
Well, he's going to be legally
He's going to take this to court. He's already flagged that.
He loves legally challenging things.
The national limit that they want to set under this is a 90 million spent. Both Labor and the Coalition spent more than that in the last election, and so did Clive Palmer. So the other concern is around the kind of electorate. There's a cap on electorate spends. A big concern from the crossbenchers who, by the way, I know Kate Chaney got briefed on the bill last week, but the rest of the crossbenchers aren't having a comprehensive briefing until Monday night, probably after it's been put to Parliament. But there's a lot of incumbent advantage. So if you're an elected MP, you get $166,000 a year to spend just on sort of communications, send out those nice newsletters, do your mobile office. You get another almost 40 grand to help travel around your electorate. So Zali Steggall has said, her second campaign when she was an incumbent cost her a lot less in actual campaigning than her first one.
So it does help even independent incumbents.
It helps independent incumbents but won't help new independents.
I just want to talk about another, I think, what was quite pivotal moment this week. Well, we've had a few pivotal moments this morning. This week, which was Peter Dutton. He actually spoke to me and he talked about tax cuts and the overhaul of the Stage 3 tax cuts and what he'd originally promised. Higher income earners would get a tax cut. He's changed that position now. Here he is.
If there are ways in which we can help people, we'll do that. But it'll largely be dependent on what the numbers are coming into the next election as to...
Oh, that's really interesting.
But I think the priority, to be honest, is to get inflation down, to get interest rates down and to support jobs in the economy because I think we're coming into a difficult period.
OK, so that's a change.
It is. Do you know what he's doing? He's just winnowing down, barnacles off, keep it simple, because the danger for, I reckon, Peter Dutton from the Trump situation is that all of his sort of Trumpy people get super emboldened and they want, I want this and that. He's like, keep it simple, right? Because he's just, all he's saying is, I'm going to fix the whole energy thing with nuclear, never mind how. And also, if you are worried about cost of living and stuff, I'll stop immigration and stop, all these people buying houses that you can't afford. It's simple, simple, simple. If he got into the weeds of, OK, so remember that tax thing that got changed? Well, I'm going to change it back again. doesn't need that sort of detail. I'm absolutely not surprised.
There's also an element of Liberals are saying that there's been so much talk about inflation and how it's fueling cost of living, and also the line that the coalition's been banging on about, and the Reserve Bank, to be fair, government spending and the impact on inflation. So the Liberals are saying, really, people don't care about tax cuts. They understand that government spending fuels inflation. That message has got through, and so it doesn't matter that they've sort
and
of
of course there's also the trying to be the Workers' Party and then delivering an income tax cut for richer people.
Exactly.
Not a great look for a Workers' Party.
This is part of the evolution of the Liberal Party away from being a party of business, free markets and their traditional heartland wealthy seats to being a populist party aiming at working class and outer metropolitan and regional seats. Besides which, it frees up a little bit of fiscal space for the Liberals to then spend in election promises. And there are no votes in that top-tier tax bracket anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you wave away the gunsmoke of the US election and all of the eye-catching detail, the correlating problem for Labor here that it shares with the Dems in America is, one, the economy is doing better than people feel it's doing, so that there's that disjunction. And secondly, the support for Labor is higher among people who do not describe themselves as under financial stress than it is among people who describe themselves as under financial stress. That is very tricky. Their job is to convince those people that they'll be worse off under Peter Dutton.
And Katina, so now, obviously this could be the last fortnight of Parliament before an election. Could be.
There is a general sense that having Parliament is not great for the government, so there is a fortnight scheduled in February. But hard to know. I think we'll really see after the end of this fortnight, the government is going to know what is possible to be legislated, what they've actually got through, what's possible, whether it's worth coming back in February, and all of that will feed into an election date choice.
Yeah, they've got housing, aged care reforms, indexation of HECS.
And the Moby Dick of interest rate cuts has just gone over the horizon. Right? We're just we're not even chasing that white whale anymore.
Now, our panel will be back in a moment for final observations. Time now, though, for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with the outgoing breakfast host at ABC Melbourne, the one and only Sammy J. Where are you outgoing to?
I'm outgoing to the country, but I'm ready to announce my candidacy for Managing Director of the ABC. And I'm also doing a national tour.
Look forward to seeing you live. Sammy, does America first mean that Australia is second?
Yeah, I've forgotten how many countries there are, probably 196th. I always think it's delightful how we like to think America thinks of us at all, but I imagine we're more like a fly that needs to be swatted away.
Lovely Brett Lethbridge, so hot right now as Peter Dutton's trying on some Trumpian headwear.
This will cover up my bald spot.
Which is Liberal moderates. There's Bridget Archer under there.
Yeah, maybe more of a blind spot. I love that it's sort of the Lego hair that you can just... I would like to have that every day.
Minifigure.
Put on a different hairstyle.
I did love this Matt Golding. It's the Never Trumper and the Never Duttoner, the we of the Never Never. Hug.
Well, look, it's been a big year. We're going to use a hug at some point. Can I hug you? No, not yet.
Oh, right.
Got to build up to it,
right.
Mike.
I did love this David Pope cartoon. It looks like Anthony Albanese is putting the O in Oval Office.
This is, we know that politics can be a dick swinging competition, but here we have a dick ringing competition instead.
There seems to be a vice on the Resolute desk, measuring the drapes. I'm sure you remember all this from last time.
Yes, the desk ornament with his forward defence strategy in the vice looks new. I mean, who would want to be the vice in this instance?
I know, right. The incomparable David Rowe. It's got Jim Chalmers and Jerome Powell, the chair of the Fed. Trump is coming.
Yes.
He's all hot air. Right. He is apparently fireproof.
Well, yeah, he's claiming he's not going anywhere. Although we do have Elon Musk riding the dragon, which I do note, I don't think there's any form of electric power here. That looks like a very gas-powered dragon to me. We've got K. Rudd was here and Turnbull as well.
Yes. Speaking of K. Rudd, you met him.
I did. We also invited Coach along, and I don't know who was more confused when this photograph was being taken.
Would you bench K. Rudd?
Were the position to become vacant. I think Trump and Coach could work well together.
It was a bit of a case of Kevin, oh heaven, don't say that. Dean Alston has got the WA view with, Mr Rudd and Mr Cook, we've heard about the social media ban. It applies to you both.
It's always the case when legislation comes in, people ask, can we make it retrospective? But sadly, when it comes to the internet, no, we can't.
I did love this Hobart Merc. David MacArthur has got the Rudd boomerang with the Trump comments coming back to not just haunt him, but hit him.
I do note that Trump isn't anywhere to be seen in here, which sort of suggests that he does tend to forget and forgive very quickly. And certainly Ambassador Rudd can hope that is the case.
There are others.
Let he who has not made an on-like critical comment about Donald Trump cast the first boomerang.
I did love this Matt Golding. My name is Kevin and I'm here to help. The sands through the hourglass. So are the K Rudds of our lives.
And of course, someone in Trump's coterie recently posting a meme of an hourglass in response to Ambassador Rudd. So it's not looking great.
Megan Herbert's picked up on a beautiful juxtaposition. Social media is doing real harm to our kids. We want to send a message that bullying, violence, fraudulent criminal activity and misogyny will not be tolerated. Trump wins. Thanks, Musk.
Yes. Although the implication that, Albo directly had Trump elected also suggests perhaps that he has powers outside his ability.
Yeah. As far as the social media ban goes, my son reminded me this week, he said, Dad, does Anthony Albanese know about VPNs?
Yeah, it is always glorious when a bunch of boomers try and explain the internet to kids.
Yeah. Lovely Kathy Wilcox. Kids need to get off social media so they're free to be kids again. But don't worry, your favourite gambling ads will still be on the telly. Good point. What are the odds?
What are the odds? Tell you what, I miss the glory days. I grew up in the 90s when the internet was just arriving and the worst that we could do was get caught playing Tetris.
I thought this was cartoon of the week. The Australian opposition prepares for the rapture with climate denial and he seems to be bathing in MAGA.
Magatonic. What do you think goes into that? Orange juice, maybe? Peter is looking wide-eyed as he stares at what is presumably the rump of Donald Trump, but it's quite the visceral image.
It's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Before I do, Mike, when I'm managing director of the ABC, what role would you like in my cabinet?
Mate, I'm good at saving money.
Yeah, well, okay, well, you better go delete those tweets you wrote about me in 2016, huh? I've got a long memory.
Didn't mean
Calling me a damn sponge. How dare you? Back to you, PK. Hug it out.
Hug it.
Thank you, Sammy J. Final observations?
Just picking up on the discussion we just had about will Parliament come back in February. Interesting to note in the coming week, Bill Shorten's giving his valedictory speech on Thursday and a few coalition people, Nola Marino, Rowan Ramsey, Mark Coulton, who are all retiring, they've all obviously been worded up to do their valedictories this week.
Interesting. While we've all been looking at Donald Trump and worrying about the alliance, interesting developments with the other team, so-called CRINCs, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. It's been concern hand-wringing that they're forming a new coalition. We now see a working case study in an active war where we've known China is funding the Russian state. Now we see the Iranians also selling drones to help the Russians. Now North Korea sends troops as well as millions of artillery shells and now howitzers to Russia. We can now see this as a functioning alliance that will help each other in a war.
Terrifying.
Yeah, that's cheering. Thank you. Look, a lot of discussion about winners and losers and everything post the Trump election. I just wanted to cast a little thought in the direction of Matthias Cormann, former finance minister, sailed off with our best wishes to run the OECD. And now finding that his signature global minimum tax regime now, I think, officially just dust, right? He's running an institution that's becoming decreasingly relevant. Put out your cigars is what I'm saying for Matthias Cormann.
You've been such a great panel, thank you. Finally, we all get sick and tired of politicians trotting out rehearsed three-word slogans, which is why this effort from the NT's Deputy Chief Minister was so refreshing. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
And I want to really point out, this is not about cutting red tape. I'm sorry, this is about cutting red tape, not cutting corners. I'll just say that again. This is about cutting red tape, not cutting red corners in relation to moving forward. So I get that wrong. I'll do it once more, sorry. Sorry, I'll do that. So this is about cutting red... No, sorry. Okay. This is not about cutting red tape, this is about cutting corners. Sorry, I got that first. So this is not about... Stop, you got me laughing now.
I'm sorry. Okay, stop.
Okay.
I think just don't say it.
Yeah, okay. So this is a really important piece of legislation, and it's going to make sure that we rebuild our... What are you on about?
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.